Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, John, on MSPs. Ukraine War News Update, first part of the 3rd of June 2024. It is a, scare quotes, normal day for me. The boys have gone back from a half term, and so my daily routines will adjust back to some kind of normality. We'll start, as per usual, with the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them on the description to the video below. 1,270 personnel lost is a high number, higher than it was indeed the day before. 14 tanks is still pretty significant. 22 armoured personnel vehicles, not as high as we have seen, but certainly above average. And 47 artillery systems is a phenomenal loss statistic in that category. And I think, to be honest, there have been quite a few targets inside inside Belgorod Oblast, the Russian oblast north of Kharkiv, where they are staging their attacks and throwing an awful lot of lead into Kharkiv with their fairly numerous artillery pieces. I think a number of those are being hit at the moment. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 3 anti-aircraft warfare systems, 67 vehicles and fuel tanks is a pretty staggering number there, and 4 pieces of special equipment. So up and down here and there, but yeah, rest assured that the Ukrainians are still attriting away at the Russian forces. Andrew Perpetua's loss statistics look very much in favour of the Ukrainians, with the just raw numbers there, about a 4-to-1 advantage. A ratio of Russian to Ukrainian losses, maybe a little bit more even. So that's exactly the numbers the Ukrainians would like. Now let's look at the type of equipment and the value. For the Ukrainians, they've lost nothing particularly high value there. There's some, obviously, two T-72s being lost is going to hurt a little bit. Bradley being abandoned, another one, and a Striker armor personnel carrier provided by the Americans has been destroyed as well. So yeah, they're not going to enjoy that. But there's no huge anti-aircraft warfare system or anything like that, or radar system. So that's good. That you are going to expect to see, and probably more and more so as the war drags on, you will see the older equipment eventually attrit away until you get onto a higher proportion of new equipment. It's exactly what we see with the Russians. And that is one indicator that the Russian stockpiles are running low, because you're saying, okay, these are... Well, actually, you can read it 2 ways. So it depends whether they are going to try and use the newer stuff first and leave the rubbish stuff until they absolutely have to use it, or you're cycling through the older stuff naturally over time so that you are only left with stuff that you can newly produce or procure. So in Ukraine's case, it is that they will eventually attrit through all their older stuff, and I'm talking sort of years down the line here, but you'll get natural wastage and attrition of their older Soviet era stocks that they started the war with, until you start getting onto they just end up losing the new stuff they're given, because all their stocks are then eventually 100% the new stuff, generally speaking. And so we will see, I'm sure, more Bradleys and more Strikers and M113s, stuff that not particularly new, but things that have been provided by allied nations, eventually take a larger and larger proportion of what they lose. With the Russians, it's a little bit more complex because of their deep stockpiles. So the Ukrainians don't have these deep stockpiles of, say, 12,000 howitzers. And so with the Russians, it can be a little bit different, where we were looking at, wasn't MTLBs, one variant of one of the vehicles they were using. And actually they've gone through all at the beginning of the war right up to recently, the proportion of what they were losing were the newer variants, and now there are no new variants, and I think that's because they're not producing them, because they only have production capacity for certain vehicles and items, and now they are just chomping through their older stockpiles of the original variant of them. What was it? It wasn't the MTLBs. I'm sure it wasn't. I'm sure it was, it could have been the MTLBs, actually, to be honest. So, which is sort of old school tracked armor personnel carrier. So now when we go into the Russian equipment, they have lost electronic warfare, surveillance and comms equipment, engineering vehicle, all the usual stuff there. We do have a Grad. I've got a video of a Grad getting taken out. No, I don't. I've got a video of a TOS-1 thermobaric launcher taken out. But I do see a number of grads taken out, and I think, I don't know at all here, but I do think a number of them are being targeted in that Belgorod Oblast, because they were peppering, and have done for some time, the Kharkiv Oblast with those multiple launch rockets. As you can see, fairly high proportion of destroyed against damaged as well for the Russians. In fact, if we look to see, actually to be honest, Ukraine has got a really high proportion of destroyed today as well. But just in general, for what we see, this is a very high brown and black proportion, and the grey there of the damaged is very small, all things considered. So I think that's bad news for both sides. But when you are losing as many pieces of kit as the Russians, that's doubly bad news. In terms of the tank losses, a lot of T-62, T-80s, T-72s, tracked guard and shed, not as many as we've seen previously, but a number of different tanks there, and a mine plow tank too. We also have in the infantry fighting vehicle category, BMP 1s, 2s and 3s and BTRs, so the whole range there, most of them, almost all of them destroyed. And we have mine-resistant ambush protection vehicle, the VPK Ural, as well as a number of ATPs, almost all destroyed, and trucks, almost all destroyed, ATVs and civilian vehicles, literally all of them destroyed there. So that's a really heavy day of losses for the Russians. Neither side has lost anything particularly valuable. No really big ticket item there, but it's, again, as I often say, quantity has its own quality. In this case, it's kind of inverse. So the amount of quantity you are losing, the amount of quality you are losing in your ability to commit to successful combined arms maneuvers. Right, then we're going to go through a couple of these I shared with you yesterday, but we're going to go through just some, and they are somewhat anecdotal claims from, but when you have so many anecdotes, it's kind of telling you a story. And the idea that these are just one-offs is highly improbable, because there's lots of people saying the same sort of thing. So Ukraine's general staff claimed that over 350 Russians were eliminated today, so that's yesterday, just in the battles around Pokrovsk, which remains the hottest part of the front. There were 55 clashes there today. They also report 10 airstrikes on Kharkiv region. Okay, so that first bit is the important part, and it shows that although Kharkiv is very hot at the moment, and Belgorod indeed, that actually there is still an awful lot of fighting taking place on the Avdiivka section of the front. So that's towards Pokrovsk, all those areas around there that are incredibly intense at the moment. And the Russians are, according to Ukrainian general staff, losing a fair amount of their troops there. In fact, that's over a quarter of the troops they have lost. So about a quarter to a third of the troops they've lost are in that area. And I guess that's what you'd expect anyway. But interesting, we haven't really heard too much from Krinky recently. Trent Telenko here says Russian accounts are claiming that the 177th Regiment, which is it's 144th, wasn't it? That's not a VDV. Russian Armed Forces 177th Regiment are facing the Ukrainian Marines in Krinky, lost 90% casualties in 2 months. So that'll be dead and wounded, deserted and captured. That is, the 177th Regiment took 45 casualties a day for 60 days with no replacements. Think through the implications of that Russian manning system. I mean, just incredible if true. So this is, I presume, a Russian source here. They drive away. So I hate those who drive our guys there knowing in advance. That's right. Okay. They drive away thoughtlessly. Of course, these are not their children. The 177th Regiment entered Krinky with 3,000 people, and it turned out 10%. It's incomprehensible to the mind. In 2 months, how many guys died? Who will be responsible for this, for such thoughtless decisions? So this is, again, absolutely no idea of the provenance and accuracy of this claim, but this is a Russian claiming that, and really angry with the fact that the claim that the 177th have lost 90% of their 3,000 troops in the Krinky area. That's phenomenal. We have heard that Krinky's been really painful for the Russians, and that's why the Ukrainians were staying in that bridgehead, trying to lure them in, bait them in to strike them. That was what my theory of the whole the whole sector was, they did draw in that Russian equipment and personnel, and we saw visual evidence of a huge amount of Russian losses there. Tough for the Ukrainians as well, but the ratio was certainly as claimed in favour of the Ukrainians. Right, another one, real story from Russia's disastrous attempt to take Vovchansk. So we're going back up to Kharkiv in the north. Where that city or that town on the border, very close to the border, has been absolutely flattened by both sides. But it has been disastrous for the Russians. Many people saying the Russians have taken huge losses there. So this is from one of the Russian soldiers there. Anton Andreev told Astra how only 12 of 100 remain from his company. So again, 10% or 12% here. You got an almost 90% loss casualty rate here, which is just what we've heard down in Krinky. Compelling testimony showing how lives mean zero to the Kremlin. So what does he say? I didn't know if I will get out of all this, but at least I would honour the memory of those who died like meat here because of certain personalities. A contractor of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation recorded a video about the situation during the offensive. 100 people survive. 12 out of 100 people survived, on Anton Andreev, a contract officer of the Armed Forces of the Russian Federation from the 5th Company of the 100,000th and 9th Regiment, told Astra about the operation of the Russian army in the offensive of Vovchansk. According to him, only 12 remained out of 100. The officers initially said that his company would be located on the border of the Russian Federation with Ukraine, but they were sent to Vovchansk. But before the offensive, even before the capture of one of the strongholds, part of the soldiers died from artillery fire. Quote, the operation, the capture of Vovchansk started late. They started driving back and forth, mortars are fired, and people are sent there. During the first night, the floor of the mouth immediately fell off. I don't know what that quite means. Most of the 300, thank God. 200 were also enough, says the Russian soldier. Again, translation, this is Google Translate, image translate, so it's going to be fairly weird. According to Andreev, the officers sent light fighters to Vovchansk with only body armour and assault rifles. On the first night in the city, they managed to capture one on the streets, but after large-scale losses again, fresh groups from the training units could not pass through houses as they were suppressed by machine guns and finished off by drones. Only one person remained in one of the groups. Okay, again, anecdotal, etc., etc. But we've heard that they've been drawing extra troops from training grounds and from other sectors on the front line to reinforce the losses that they've been making in this Kharkiv direction. And if the people they first sent in were for the training groups, and that tells you what the state of play is for the Russian forces, and then you're questioning, are they going to be mounting a serious offensive in the summer? Well, if they're using presently for maybe some kind of shaping operation, maybe some kind of draw the Ukrainians away from somewhere else, which is what most people agree that this operation is. If they're trying to draw Ukrainian troops from the front line, they're drawing their own troops because they've taken such huge losses. They're doubling down, they're not cutting their losses, and it's a sunk cost fallacy. They're piling more in, but the first lot they piled in were trained off the training ground that were poorly equipped. Light body armour and assault rifles. And that's that. Go on, guys, go for it. Off the training ground. Does this, again, if this is true, what does this reflect? Are the Russians in a good position? I don't think so. So as bad as the Ukrainians are having it and have had it, like the Russians, I think, are suffering even more, but they have the capacity to suffer more. Quote, you walk down the street, it seems that everything is normal, but then you get hit by machine guns, especially drones, take out so many troops. And the commander of the radio shouts, forward, forward. It's impossible to retreat. When there are 5 to 10 people left from all groups, they may retreat. But then half of the 300 is already there. 300 being, are they injured, wounded? Andreev describes the storming of the streets in Vovchansk. So obviously a bit of weird translation. Then we've got another guy here, a wounded Russian, again from Kharkiv, talks about how deadly it is to supply advanced Russian units as Ukrainian drones target in priority supply lines. This is one I shared with you yesterday. It's not easy. Now at the stage of evacuation, the stage of logistics supply suffers more than combat units, he said. The enemy is trying to knock out logistics. It's the delivery of everything from the yellow zone to the red zone. This is the interval. Again, the translation is a bit dodgy. The greatest degree of drone impact is inflicted. The greatest danger and the greatest losses are incurred. So anyway, another example of how things are really tough up in that area. And then we have another one captured in North. So the other one, I don't think was captured. He was just injured. But this is a captured Russian soldier, 24-year-old in northern Kharkiv. He said out of 300, only 9 of them remained after a few days. So if you talk about 10% before, we're now talking, what's that, 3%? 3% of his group of 300 remained after a few days. Now, if that is true, and I have no reason to disbelieve it, you can find reasons to disbelieve it. Is it psyops, etc., etc.? But it appears to be backed up by everything else we are hearing and everything we are seeing. I've seen some pretty horrific video images of lots of dead people in Vovchansk area. It appears that this is very plausibly true. He speaks of colossal losses, confusion, and blocking troops. So if you retreat, you're shot. They are told to move forward no matter what. And when they arrived in the first Ukrainian village, it was empty. Then it was a rain of fire. And yeah, again, I'm not going to go into that one. That's a 4-minute 10 video of him complaining about the situation there, and it seems pretty horrific. And talking about what's going on in Kharkiv and indeed Belgorod, Sumy, and across into Kursk. This is good news. So a German general says Ukraine's German supply Patriot batteries can engage targets inside Russia from Kharkiv Oblast while defending the region suffering from Russian aerial strikes across the border every day. Now, the German Patriot system was brought into northern Ukraine last May and took out at least 5 Russian airframes in about an hour and a half or something. It was an incredibly useful purple patch, and then apparently that caused a political fracas between the Germans, Americans, and Ukrainians. Who said basically Germans and Americans don't ever use our weapons to fire into Russia again. Now that's changed, and now Germans have explicitly given the Ukrainians permission to shoot air defense into Russian territory. That is huge, because I'm fairly sure they'd be pretty hot on getting a Patriot system close to that front line and taking out those planes that are doing so much damage to places like Vovchansk and indeed Kharkiv itself. And also, add to that, Ukraine will be able to strike Russia using 24 of the F-16 jets sent by the Netherlands, according to Politico. So some weapons the F-16s could use include JSOW glide bombs, HARM anti-radar missiles, AMRAAM air-to-air missiles, JDAM-ER glide bombs, and small diameter bombs. So nothing out of the ordinary on that loadout. But this is really important because Belgium recently said that Ukraine couldn't use 30 of the Belgian F-16s that were going to be given to Ukraine. So I presume those F-16s will be sent down to or be used in the eastern and southern front lines rather than the northern front lines where the Dutch F-16s will be used. Tea break. Keeps me going. So some really good news going forward there. Now, the Patriots could be utilised as soon as they can get them up there, if they are willing and able to do so. The F-16s, obviously, you're going to have to wait to see them operational in that neck of the woods. And then on top of that, the Ukrainians have been hammering the Belgorod region with HIMARS and also drones. A lot of drones operating in that area just over the border, sort of 20-kilometre range on those sort of FPV drones. 4 people were injured in this attack on Shebekina. I showed you this yesterday. It was denied by the Russians as being a military target. They said it was a market. So 4 people injured in Russia's border town of Shebekina after explosions at the central market. Kremlin is telling media to write about Ukraine's Nazis and saying cluster munitions were used at a purely civilian area in Belgorod region. But is it all as it seems? You see what the Russians were saying there. This photo shows part of the Iskander missile almost intact from the Shebekino market. Yes, Ukraine has cluster munitions but cannot use them inside Russia, so it seems likely that Russia stored missiles at the civilian market. Ukraine hit them, causing munitions to explode. And that appears to be one of the missiles there that wasn't the missile fired in by Ukraine, because it's not a Ukrainian missile, it's a Russian Iskander. Yeah, there you go. Russians are full of caca. Then the video has finally come out of that strike into Kursk, of that column of vehicles. It was mainly supply vehicles from what I can work out. The Ukrainians struck, ideally you would have hit this column with HIMARS missiles, really. This is a suboptimal way of doing what they eventually did. See if I can get, so as you can see, that's not all of them. There were a lot of supply vehicles coming down this road. They hit one near the front. They were claiming to hit one near the back. I can't see that, but the claim was they hit one in the front, hit one in the back with FPVs, and then all the other vehicles dispersed. And this video just shows them hunting all those other vehicles that are hiding in different places like tree lines where they had escaped to. And I don't know how many were destroyed in total. There are claims from some very pro-Ukrainian accounts saying that the Ukrainians destroyed the rest of the column. I don't know they did that much, but there's certainly, I can't seem to get along to different points of this video. Yeah, typical. But when I can, of course, the music plays because life. So as you can see, a lot of them are sort of driven off into tree lines in various places and then get hit, a couple of them on the roads, but a lot of them are trying to hide out and they get taken out by the drones. And this shows you how effective the drones are, which then, if we're going to go back to what all of these guys are saying, drones are everywhere, basically causing us a right nightmare. And indeed, I think I have a claim. Let's go and talk about this. Is this... yeah, let's read this out, because even though it's from somewhere else, I think it might be useful. So the occupiers' plans for Odessa must be fading. A Russian serviceman from the Zaporizhia region writes in a Russian telegram on the activity of Ukrainian drones, making the life of the occupiers extremely unbearable. If there is any movement, you can be spotted and fired at using artillery. The Zaporizhia region is, of course, large, so it's impossible to say exactly which area this character describes, but the story is rather revealing. And I think you can transpose this onto the northern regions as well. So this Russian says, I wish you good health. I would like to report the situation and write with recommendations in the Zaporizhia direction. Ukrainian reconnaissance actively uses drones of various types: reconnaissance, strike, kamikaze, and even those redirecting signals from their headsets. In addition, their artillery calibrates their fire using drones, making their attacks more accurate. Electronic warfare is blocking our communications and navigation, therefore camouflage and cover become vital. The ban on movement during the day was introduced for a reason. Interesting. So the Russians have banned moving during the day. And that's therefore showing you how important night vision drones are. Unfortunately, we have lost many people precisely because of non-compliance with these rules. They detect any movement and open fire. There were cases when guys a few hundred meters from the positions went out to eat or just breathe out and received shrapnel wounds. Safety rules are now very strict, and breaking them means being irresponsible with your life. Disguising equipment and shelter is also the number one security issue. Ukrainians direct the artillery and records the coordinates of each flash. Therefore, even a slight movement of vehicles can cause an artillery strike. We constantly update camouflage nets, collect fresh vegetation and so on, so it's not to give away positions. Near the front line, the situation is even worse. Their evacuation is a real roulette. In a matter of minutes, you can lose a lot of blood and the ambulance transport will not have time to arrive. There is not always enough of it. This leads to severe, irreversible consequences. Therefore, irreversible meaning, I'm sure, dead. Therefore, over there, we try to stay as collected as possible and not to take risks unless absolutely necessary. In general, the situation is very tense, but we hold on. We must strictly follow the rules. This will help us survive. If someone forgets about safety even for a minute, there can be extremely negative consequences both for himself and for the entire group. I hope this information will help you gain a better understanding of the realities of the front lines and help you prepare appropriately. Be careful and vigilant. What's interesting here is, unless the Russians are actively on the attack, like you can see around, say, Novomykhailivka, Krasnohorivka, Avdiivka, Chasiv Yar, right? You got those places where they're constantly attacking, and therefore different dynamics going on. If you're sort of, I don't know, holding the line, then if the Ukrainians have this prevalence of drone activity, you become just a prisoner in your dugout. What I understand from this is you can't move, you can't even go out and get a breather. They will spot you and you'll be hit. And then, what are you doing? What is your role there? Just, I'd imagine it really is tense. Tense is a great way to describe that. I imagine living in that situation where you can't move more than in your immediate environs for fear of being targeted by Ukrainian drones. Must be really scary. Okay. So going back to the drones hitting that column in Kursk, there's some serious damage done there, and a lot of equipment and supplies that would have been supplying those troops attacking into Sumy. If that was going to happen, then you're thinking, well, have you stopped them being able to attack? What does this mean for those troops that are amassing north of the border there? That would be a bit suicidal anyway. Sumy, I think, has got some pretty decent defenses built. Anyway, TOS 1A, I talked about earlier, with loaded ammunition, went up in a big ball of flames. So that's been hit, and they are quite vulnerable. They've only got a range of about 6 kilometers for firing, so they have to get fairly close to the contact line to be used. They obviously, when they are used, they're pretty horrific, but when they do blow up, goodness me, they blow up. Now, a couple of Russian howitzers here, 152mm howitzers, the Mr. Bs. These were destroyed in Belgorod, and I think you're seeing a systematic destruction of Russian equipment, artillery in Belgorod now, and that's feeding into the large number of artillery systems we're seeing lost on a daily basis, and there's some evidence of that, not just me saying it. And then other various strikes. So yesterday, an attack on a Russian Defense Ministry deployment site in the Korochansky district in the Belgorod region again resulted in several units of Russian military equipment being burned out and 3 servicemen wounded. An explosion during the fire led to the death of Igor Nechiporenko, deputy head of the district administration. The blast also injured Nikolai Vasilievich Nestorov, head of the district, and 2 rural settlement leaders, as well as 3 servicemen. So it's some fairly high-level people being hit there in another strike on a Belgorod target. On top of all that, you've got Russia on fire. So for the next chapter in the popular series, we head to Dubna in the wider Moscow region, says Tim White, on the shores of the Ivankovo Reservoir, also known as the Moscow Sea. Wooden buildings are burning at the boat club. The cause is unknown. It's quite widespread fire in the end there, by the looks of it. And then we have a huge fire in Irkutsk, very much out in the regions, minus the warehouse of building and paint materials. The area of the fire was 4,000 square meters. The roof collapsed. Again, another big fire. But it doesn't end there. Another fire, this time at a warehouse for fuel and lubricant materials in Novosibirsk in Russia. The area of the fire was 4,500 square meters. Currently, about 55 firefighters are working at the site, and 16 pieces of equipment are involved there. Just, huge fire there. So I keep reporting on them because I think it is important to get a sense of the sheer number of those fires that are taking place on a weekly basis. I mean, each one of those fires for me would be certainly state news, like county news, for a long time. And or possibly, national news. That a fire that size, you remember that. We had our Grenfell Tower, and that was a decade bit of news that. Well, they seem to have fires that are comparable, maybe not to a skyscraper fire like that, but they seem to have these huge fires on such a regular basis that that is reflective of something going on. Right, it's been a quiet night in general, except Kharkiv, so no real missiles or drones sent, I think, from either side, although when that is seemingly the case, you often hear eventually, like a day later, this oil depot was attacked. And, that some of that news from these deep attacks into Russian territory don't come out immediately always. But anyway, it appears for the time being that it was a quiet night on both sides. No major drone or long-range missile attacks except for the northeast region, so Kharkiv is still suffering. A big rocket attack on Slobozhan, where one person was killed after a sports centre was hit. I believe if that was the one that was a huge explosion, I believe there was a big a big attack somewhere in Kharkiv. It wasn't Kharkiv city, but it was around there somewhere. And I don't know if it was that one. I don't know if he talks about it elsewhere. For those reading late last night, this blast in Kharkiv is the enormous explosion I wrote about in Zmiev, south of Kharkiv city, and in the Slobozhan community. A man who died was an internally displaced person from Donetsk. So Ukraine says Russia fired 5 S-300 missiles from Belgorod in that attack. So that is why the Ukrainians are hell-bent on taking out the Russian S-300 systems in Belgorod, because they do huge amounts of damage by slinging in their missiles with wild abandon into Kharkiv Oblast. And in general, like, to go back to strikes in general, Ukraine's power grid is in critical condition, as we've talked about previously, as 70% lost due to Russian strikes. $12.5 billion in damages caused. That also has meant daily blackouts, energy price hikes for Ukrainians. Ukrainian Energy Support Fund only received $434 million in aid, falling far short of what was actually needed. Russia deliberately targeted Ukrainian thermal power plants, which has caused widespread daily blackouts across Ukraine, with the grid unable to meet peak demands. Ukrainians are facing electricity price increases up to 50% as stable supply remains uncertain. To keep lights on, Ukraine relies on nuclear power plants and EU imports. Exactly what I said previously. The Russians don't yet have the guts to go for nuclear power plants, and so therefore they are kind of ring-fenced in terms of not being struck by missiles directly. So that means all the thermal power plants and hydroelectric power plants and other forms of power will get all the Russian attention. However, without robust air defenses, the Euromaidan press says restoring power plants is futile as Russia can strike them. Ukraine urgently needs American Patriot systems to protect its energy infrastructure from Russian missiles. Okay, so moving on to other bits and pieces now. Just to let you know that Akhmat have been transferred to the Belgorod region to participate in the creation of a buffer zone, according to Alexei Laudonov. Now, Laudonov, that's interesting that that's an admission that one of their intentions, at least, is a creation of a buffer zone, which is kind of what we've been saying. Buffer zone, ability to hit Kharkiv with artillery directly and draw Ukrainian troops away from other areas on the front line. All of those have failed, so they've not created a buffer zone. It's just two particular areas, not even a contiguous buffer zone for as long as it needs to be. They can't hit Kharkiv with artillery yet. They haven't got into Lipsy in the north, and they've been rebutted and, in fact, arguably moved back. And the third point is that they are drawing their own troops away from the front line and training centres, thus not really affecting the ratio advantage not really affecting the ratio to gain the advantage that they would be intending. So as far as I can work out, the three objectives they would have for that attack have all failed. Right. I've been saying this, I've said this before. Tim White says, yep, saying this too. It's good to see validation from the UK intelligence. What are we talking about? Right. On the 21st of May 2024, Russian media reported that General Major Ivan Popov, so he's a guy that was arrested for supposedly corruptly selling off scrap metal, but he's actually doing that to line his own pockets, but to support his own units. Anyway, former commander of the Russian 58th Combined Arms Army had been arrested on charges of fraud and corruption related to the sale of military construction materials. Popov was dismissed from his post as commander of the 58th CAA, deployed to Zaporizhia sector in Ukraine in July 2023 after the private criticism about the competence of Russian defense leadership's decisions relating to the conduct of the war were publicized. So in other words, he wasn't really arrested for that. He was removed because he is critical of the Russian war machine, of the Russian decision making, and he was very much liked by his men. They are loyal to him, and there were claims that they have stopped fighting in areas because he's been arrested. I've not heard anything about that since, but certainly the morale will be low for those fighting in Zaporizhia, as this guy's been arrested, and he was one of the good ones, at least as far as they were concerned. Popov subsequently criticised the decision to remove him publicly, describing it as, quote, our senior commander hitting us from the rear, treacherously and vilely beheading the army at the most difficult and tense moments. In a system where corruption itself is endemic, its punishment is often more a political tool than an attempt to enforce good governance. In other words, exactly what I've been saying, that everyone's corrupt, as in you've got compromat on every single Russian military leader and politician. It's just like, if the FSB want to get rid of anyone, or the Russian military want to get rid of anyone, they can. You just got it stored up, ready for the right moment. You've really pissed me off. Or, you have become less useful. Your utility doesn't reach the threshold, so we're going to get rid of you now. We're just going to get a little black book and go, Ah, yes. Yeah, we've got what we've got on you. So you are sleeping with 6 mistresses, and you've embezzled this from those accounts, and you've done this. So we're going to take you down on that. And they just got it all stacked up. There is a long history of the Russian regime using corruption charges, real or invented, to remove or punish internal critics or those who have angered more powerful elite figures. It is likely Popov's arrest is a demonstrative punishment for his perceived disloyalty to his superiors. As an army commander, Popov was generally regarded as highly competent and, according to Russian military commentators, was popular among Russian troops. His arrest is likely to further dismay Russian military personnel and reinforce to his peers in senior command positions that loyalty and obedience to the regime and one's superiors is valued more highly than competence and charisma. It's really important. So on the one hand, you will get loyalty out of this. So anyone else that's thinking, oh, I've just seen what's happened to Popov, yeah, I'm going to keep my mouth closed about how terrible things are. So it does keep everyone in line, but it also doesn't reward competence. And I think you end up, you do a lot of this for a long time, and you just have loyal but shite people running things. Yep, you won't have a coup, but you will have a military defeat. That large-scale forest fire, 30,000 plus hectares now in Burachia due to a thunderstorm. That's what started it. It's still not been put out. And I showed you a train going through. Here's a vehicle driving on the roads. It is a pretty horrendous-looking fire, that one. So, yeah, terrible stuff there. Again, I show you this because it's a case of like Russia on fire in terms of the buildings. That tells you something. Then you've got forest fires that would normally be put out by the conscripts who can't do that because they're fighting at war. And at the same time, Kaliningrad is going underwater. So cars all over the city are flooded with water. Vehicles are stored in rivers. And in some places are flooded literally up to the roofs. Some streetcar routes have been cancelled by the city. Buses are bypassing flooded areas. Residential buildings and stores have also been affected by the weather. So they've got floods and fires, and probably not the amount of money they'd like to throw at solving these problems, which means that next year they'll probably be even worse, and so on and so forth. It's this cycle of disaster, really, that the war has brought about. At the same time, this is fascinating. So Russia's transferred 2 Karakut-class vessels from the Black Sea. So rather than getting vessels to the Black Sea, they're getting them out of the Black Sea and taken to the Caspian Sea, probably through canal channels, after a, quote, series of successful Ukrainian attacks. That is according to UK Ministry of Defence. But wow, so the Russians kind of giving up on being able to maintain a significant naval presence in the Black Sea. It's absolutely incredible to me. And again, if this is true, it's come from UK intelligence, so one would assume it is. Why is mainstream media not talking about the massive success Ukraine have had with no navy in rendering the Russian navy, the Russian Black Sea Fleet, ineffective? They've done an incredible job, the Ukrainians there. Now, let's talk a little bit about satellite imagery, and this is really frustrating because I think one of the ways that Russia has improved over the last 6 months has been in terms of targeting and the use of their missiles. I think the drones are being intercepted at a pretty decent rate at the moment as far as the Ukrainians are concerned, but the missiles are having a great effect on energy infrastructure and on certain targets. They're even getting fairly time-sensitive targets hit by Iskanders and whatnot. So the Russians have upped their game, certainly with satellite and drone reconnaissance, and I think that is having a really... Thank you very much, Ivan. I really appreciate that. Here's to a good cup of tea. Cheers. So I think the Russians have really upped their game there and are getting a bit of advantage in that respect, or at least they're doing a lot better than they were. And I was putting at least some of this down to the Chinese helping with imagery and intelligence, and I think that's certainly the case. But there's also this claim that it's actually satellite imagery providers who are working with the Russians. So OSINT agency says Euromaidan Press cooperation between Russia and satellite imagery providers is possible despite sanctions. So again, it's a case of breaking sanctions, but this is possibly one of the, if it's happening, one of the most egregious breaking of the sanctions, because this has given direct ability for the Russians to strike Ukrainian targets. So it's like, other than handing Russia some missiles, it's actually almost more important than the missiles. Like missiles, you can fire missiles anywhere into Ukraine. You just fling them in there. Yep, there you go. Don't know where it's going to land. Do your best. But if you want to really hurt Ukraine, you need to know where you need to strike. And the only way you know that is by being able to target effectively. And so, decent missile strikes are contingent upon the missiles and the intelligence. This is so important. On March the 18th, 2024, the Atlantic media site reported that there is a possible link between the sale of commercial satellite images and Russian missile strikes on Ukraine. The author contacted a company that analyzes these images, and they noticed a recurring pattern. First, someone buys a satellite image of a particular area, and a few days later, a Russian missile hits that location. This scenario has been repeated multiple times throughout 2022. So this is going back a long time. Analysts at the MOLFAR agency, who specialize in OSINT, open source intelligence research, decided to verify this hypothesis and conducted a post-investigation based on the Atlantic's material. MOLFAR analysts confirmed the Atlantic's investigation and uncovered new evidence that satellite images are being used for preliminary surveillance of targets and adjusting subsequent strikes. In addition, HUMINT, which is human intelligence, investigation proved that cooperation between Russia and Maxar's intermediary companies is possible. Despite sanctions and statements about restrictions, this industry continues to fuel Russian attacks against Ukraine. According to MOLFAR, analysing the number of images before and after the shelling of different territories reveals a clear pattern that confirms a dependence between satellite images and strikes. This indicates the targeted use of this data for military actions, specifically for adjusting subsequent attacks. This is it just frustrates the heck out of me. So Maxar and Planet, the companies, we go to the end of the article, allegedly providing the satellite images, claim they thoroughly vet their clients and adhere to US laws, which have prohibited transactions with Russia since February 2022. Maxar notes that the companies ceased all cooperation with Russian organizations, including trade intermediaries. Planet states that they provide images to responsible entities such as governments, humanitarian organizations, and media outlets. Of course, people like Andrew Perpetua can buy these images. So it's rather similar, or indeed entirely, it's identical to the situation with sanctioned components, right? You make a widget, you're not allowed to sell it to Russia, so you sell it to these guys, sell it to who sell it to them, then goes abroad, then eventually ends up in Kyrgyzstan, and then goes across the border to Russia, and they've got a widget, and they can now make their missile. With satellite imagery, it's like, yeah, you can't sell it to a Russian, Ivan Smirnov. So you're like, yeah, I can't sell it to him. You're sanctioned, so I'm going to sell it to you. Who sells it to them, and then, oh dear, look, Ivan Smirnov's got the image. Who knew? Something needs to be done about this. This is freaking important. So if you pretend to be, for example, a representative of a Kazakhstani company using a completely fake name, company name, and corporate email, and contact resellers from other countries, the American providers will not check you. At least this is exactly what our experiment demonstrated, Molfart writes. And I think the US DOD or whoever it is needs to go right into Maxar and Planet and say, dudes, you don't do that anymore. Might affect OSINT actually quite a bit. It might end up getting really tight on OSINT because I'm sure it's the same kind of principle, isn't it? You know, like, how do you know? Say, for example, you sell some imagery to Tochny, to Andrew Perpetua and his team, and they say, and that's all fine and above board, and they say, well, we're not going to break any laws, which they don't, right? Quite often, Andrew says, I can't show you this. I'd love to show you this, but I'm not allowed to show you the satellite image by the licensing rules. But, you know, imagine that Andrew was actually, I don't know, Surrey Maps or something, and they were then just passing that under the counter to Ivan Smirnov. You know, how easy that would be. And so Andrew, indeed, himself says, did any of y'all notice how Ukraine shooting into Russia led to Russia doing literally nothing? You promised me nuclear war. I was looking forward to a nuclear war. I was going to use that time to sleep. Now, when am I supposed to sleep? Tongue in cheek, obviously, but it's incredible. Like, what have we learnt from this whole, oh my God, it's escalatory. What's Jake Sullivan and his guys learnt about, should we let them use missiles into Belgrade? Okay, let's sit down. Let's have a discussion about it. Okay, let's present that to Biden. But Joe, are you okay with this? I mean, these are escalation. We're a bit worried, but should we go for it? Yeah. Okay, let's go. We advise you, Joe, though, not to allow ATACMS because that's too escalatory. Yeah. We'll see how they react to this. I mean, goodness me, I'm worried about this being start World War III. Okay, we'll do it. Yeah. Okay, you can use missiles, and that's it. No ATACMS, though. You can use regular HIMARS. Go for it. What did Russia say? Square root of NAFL. We might as well let them use ATACMS then. Yep, you might as well have done. And finally, Washington Post reports on news site editors' ties to Iran. So kind of similar to American entities. Well, not really that similar. So those satellite image producers having their stuff get to Russia. We've also heard about, and I'm not trying to pick on America, I'm sure this is happening in many places. In fact, it certainly is. You're going to have Eastern European countries suffering with this big time. But of course, it's easier for us to find out about English language stuff. We've had a number of propagandists on Twitter being sort of, scare quotes, doxed, not quite doxed, but revealed to be Americans actually just hating on the US, I guess, and being pro-Russian. And along with that, we've got now a news site editor ties to Iran and Russia show misinformation's complexity. Experts say an overlap in funding underscores concern that the spread of falsehoods and propaganda online is entering a more complicated stage as the November election draws closer. This is around particularly this website called The Grey Zone, right, which is an American news website that does appear to be rather pro-Russian. Recently unearthed documents reveal that leaders of an online news site aimed at Americans have received money from both Russian and Iranian government media outlets, showing how widening geopolitical alliances are making it harder to identify and trace foreign influence operations. This is what I just shut it down. If I don't know where it's based, Washington based, just shut it down. Oh, censorship. This is an arm of the Russian armed forces, if you like. This is a propaganda arm of the Kremlin. You don't welcome their money in to pay your American people to spread misinformation and lies to American people, so they vote for people who will do exactly what the Kremlin wants. That is like, do you know what? I really want a disease that's going to eat away at my bones and my body. Yeah, come on, I'm going to lick the pavement. I'm going to lick the gravel. Yeah, disease me. Yeah, brilliant. Freedom of disease. I love freedom of disease. I'm dead. Yeah, well done. Or I go, I'm not going to lick the gravel because that's a stupid idea and it's going to give me a disease. In the same way, I'm not going to allow this media organisation to take money from Russia and Iran to spread a vile disinformation inside my country. So, do you know what? Sod off. That's kind of how I feel at the moment about stuff like this. It's just, I've had enough. Just do one. Hacked emails and other documents from Iranian government-funded Press TV show payments of thousands of dollars to a writer who is now a Washington-based editor for Grey Zone, whose founder regularly appears on Russian television. Well, who knew? And once accepted a trip to Moscow for a celebration of Russian state-controlled video network RT. Oh, who knew? That featured Vladimir Putin. Misinformation experts say the overlap in funding underscores concern. I mean, it's freaking obvious. That the spread of falsehoods and propaganda online is entering a more complicated stage as the November election draws closer. Quote, what you are reporting is, I think, the most practical example of that convergence we've seen. When you have someone who has deep ties to Iranian state media working for an organisation that we also know is a destination for narrative laundering from Russia, said Emerson Brooking, a co-director of the Atlantic Council's Digital Forensics Research Lab. Press TV files, much of them in Persian, were released on Telegram in 2022 by a self-proclaimed hacktivist group called Black Reward, but the files received little attention then. An activist disinformation researcher, Neil Rauhauser, converted them into a searchable format and provided them to the Washington Post. The files appear to show that the Iranian broadcaster paid a Washington-based reporter for occasional contribution to its programming in 2020 and 2021, and while he's working as a correspondent for Russia's Sputnik news outlet, which is like uber propaganda. The reporter, Wyatt Reed, had 9 bylines in the online publication Grey Zone in 2019 to 20, followed by a gap of 2.5 years. He's had 24 more Grey Zone bylines since mid-2023 when he was identified as managing editor. So on and so forth. Lots more information there. But, we talk about YouTube and X. Grey Zone does not disclose its financial backing. Little known among most segments of the population, it has hundreds of thousands of followers on both YouTube and X, Twitter, and its stories sometimes ricochet among both far left and far right. X owner Elon Musk has helped that, corresponding on his platform last year with Grey Zone personality Aaron Mate, when Mate accused the investigative website Bellingcat of being a NATO front and said that the White House had squelched talks of a negotiated settlement in Ukraine. I keep telling you that Elon Musk is a bad guy here. He's not a good faith actor when it comes to Ukraine and Russia. But because you guys love Elon Musk so much, some of you, you're like, no, you're rubbish. Blah, blah, blah. He picks all the wrong people to amplify. He really does. He is not a good man. Grey Zone founder and editor Blumenthal appears on RT and attended the same 2015 Moscow Gala dinner as Michael Flynn. Michael Flynn, who is this seems to be pro-Russian guy who was in Donald Trump's cabinet and is primed to be someone if Donald Trump gets in. So we hear yesterday that Donald Trump wants to purge all the top military leaders in the US to do some kind of authoritarian style reinvention of the US administration in line with Project 2025. It's all very scary stuff. You know my views on Donald Trump. They're even more critical today than they were yesterday. It is not good news, but you put this together, you put the people he likes, Elon Musk, he wants as an advisor. Michael Flynn. I mean, these people are in the Russian sphere of influence. You are inviting the fox into the hen house. Yeah, come and say, you can be head chicken. I know you look a bit like a fox, but come and be head chicken in charge of this coop, and you can be head chicken in charge of that coop. Thank you very much. So anyway, how's it go? Oh, what do you mean all the chickens are dead? Oh. Just what are you doing? What are you doing? It's all very scary. Very scary. And that's enough for me. Thanks for listening. I mean, you go and read this. Is a very interesting article involving, ideas of Trump and Musk and misinformation and Mate and Blumenthal. Very scary stuff. Thanks for watching. Take care. Speak soon. Toodle pips.